Greetings, everyone. Dr. Frank here. I recently posted a graph which summarizes the voter roll situation in every state in the country. There were so many good comments and questions, I decided to prepare a short presentation for you. First, let me tell you how I got the data for this graph. Essentially, I explored every state election website, usually the Secretary of State, and then the U.S. Census data for that state. It was a couple of days' work. Then I prepared this graph to make it easy to see the status of the whole country and in every state. A few years ago, I had prepared a similar graph for the 2020 election, but this time I've taken a slightly different approach. In the older graph, I used the voting age population as my reference. In the new graph, I'm using the voting eligible population. So let's review the new graph. The data in this graph are for the 2024 election. For reference, I'm using the voting eligible population, which includes citizens over 18 and those legally allowed to vote, VEP for short. The horizontal axis shows the percent of the voting eligible population that are registered in a particular state, and the vertical axis shows the percent of the voting eligible population that turned out. First, any state that has more than 90% of its voting eligible population registered is going to have very dirty voter rolls. I know this from 4 years of detailed study of the voter rolls from every state, where our teams have then knocked on the doors of residents to confirm our findings. I've marked the 90% and higher registration region of the graph with a red gradient. Obviously, if a state has more than 100% of their voting eligible population registered, their voter rolls must be dirty. I've marked that region of the graph in solid red. Unless there is a huge amount of cheating in a state, you won't receive ballots from more than 100% of your registered voters. I've marked the upper left corner of the graph in gray to show where the 100% turnout threshold is. For reference, I also show where the 90%, 75%, and 55% turnouts of registered voters would appear in the graph. I've indicated in green where the ideal region for registration and voting for a state would be. Essentially, a clean voter rolls would have about 70 to 80% of its voting eligible population registered, and a clean election would have about 50 to 65% of its voting eligible population turning out. As I mentioned at the start, the data I'm about to show you come from the U.S. Census and the respective state election websites. The first set of 9 states that I'm showing you here all have more people registered than they have voting eligible populations. Obviously, these 9 states must have very dirty voter rolls. You shouldn't have more people in the voter rolls than you even have people. There are other states in a similar situation, but they are currently hiding this fact by only reporting the number of active voters in their rolls. For example, like the state of Maine. Now for the rest of the states. I've placed asterisks on the states where I don't yet know the total number of people in the rolls and only the number of active voters in the 2024 election. For example, Maine has some of the dirtiest voter rolls, and I suspect that they're actually near 110% of their voting eligible population registered, since they haven't substantially cleaned their rolls and they were at 104% of their voting age population as of 2022. The alarming fact that so many of the states have dirty voter rolls is not an accident, and it is a direct consequence of federal interference. Since 1993 and the National Voter Registration Act, or NVRA, states have been automatically registering people to vote, accelerating the growth of the rolls, but not cleaning the rolls at a commensurate rate. Obviously, the state with the cleanest voter rolls is Wyoming. Their voter rolls are so clean because they automatically and aggressively remove people who don't participate in their elections. They don't prohibit people that have been removed from voting. They just have to sign up again or show proof of residence and identification. Wyoming is the most MAGA state in the country, voting about 3-1 for Trump, with over 60% of their voting eligible population casting ballots. So their voting turnout is in the ideal range, but their voter rolls are perhaps excessively clean. Still, I'd rather have them too clean than excessively dirty, like what we find in the rest of the states, because dirty voter rolls facilitate election fraud. Another alarming fact illustrated by this graph is the huge disparity of reported turnout between the states. Does 20% more of the voting eligible population vote in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Maine versus West Virginia, Texas, and Oklahoma? Are the people there that much more patriotic? I don't think so. This more likely exposes the amount of election tinkering going on all across the country. The situation is dire, and we desperately need election reform in this country, and that starts in each local community. As I've been preaching for several years all over the country, there isn't a top-down legislative solution. The only solution is for communities to reclaim local control of their elections. But the federal government and the states like having central control, so that's the battle that we are fighting now. It's just a recent incarnation of the age-old battle between individuals and centralization of government. If you're ready to get started, send me an email and I'll send you a checklist for launching your local effort. I've spent the last 4 years developing and nurturing effective strategies for use by local teams. And as you're building your local team, I recommend that you schedule a public event and invite me to speak. I don't charge a fee, and it will help you to get organized, stimulate local interest, and begin to build some local momentum. I thank you for your attention.